Classification section 2, kingdoms and domains. We'll go through a bell ringer, we'll go through our key ideas, and then updating classification systems, the 3-domain system, and then we'll summarize. So our bell ringer, what are the 6 kingdoms representing life on Earth? So our key ideas for this section. Have biologists always recognize the same kingdoms? We'll talk about previous kingdoms that were recognized and then how they've branched out and how new kingdoms have been created. And then we will also talk about what are the domains and kingdoms of the 3-domain system of classification. So updating classification systems. For many years after Linnaeus created his system, there were really only 2 kingdoms. The 2 kingdoms were plants and animals. Everything got put in those 2 groups. Biologists have added complexity and detail to classification systems as they have learned more. And so as they learned more, they actually decided to create new kingdoms instead of just having plants and animals. And many new taxa have been proposed and some have been reclassified. So for example, sponges. Sponges used to be classified as plants. However, with the advent of microscopes and studying sponge cells, we started to realize that sponges were much more like animals than they were actually plants. And so sponges have been reclassified into the animal kingdom. In the 1800s, scientists added the kingdom Protista as a group for unicellular organisms. And Protista is kind of the leftover group. And then soon they noticed differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And so scientists ended up creating the kingdom Monera for all of the prokaryotes. Monera would include all of those bacteria. By the 1950s, kingdoms Monera, Protista, fungi, plants, and animals were all used. In the 1990s, with the advent of genetic testing and genetic data, we as scientists noticed that there were 2 groups of prokaryotes. There was not only one group of prokaryotes. So the kingdom Monera was then split into 2 kingdoms, being eubacteria and archaeobacteria. Eubacteria, remember EU stands for true, so they're the true bacteria. And then archaeobacteria are those things that are like extremophiles, those organisms that live in environments that would be pretty inhospitable to most organisms. The 3-domain system. So as biologists saw differences between 2 kinds of prokaryotes, they saw similarities among many different types of eukaryotes. And so a new system divided all organisms into 3 domains. The 3 domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So tentatively, biologists recognize 3 domains and 6 kingdoms. This picture inside of your notes shows the different groups of organisms, shows the 3 domains. Domain bacteria are all the bacteria, the true bacteria, the eubacteria. Domain archaea are all the archaeobacteria. Domain eukarya constitutes the protists, the plants, the fungi, and the animals. So major taxa have defined or are defined by major characteristics, and those characteristics include cell type. Are they prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Cell walls. Do they have a cell wall or not have a cell wall? Their body type. Are they unicellular or multicellular? And then their nutrition. Are they autotrophic, where they make their own food from the sun? Or are they heterotrophic, where they get nutrients from other organisms? So related groups of organisms will also have similar genetic material and systems of genetic expression. So that basically just means that if I'm an organism that is a human, I have the same genetic material, relatively the same genetic material as all other humans, as all other Homo sapiens. And I also have the same mechanisms that go about creating the genes or creating the proteins from the genes that we have inside of our bodies. Organisms may have a unique system of DNA, RNA, and proteins. And this slide shows those characteristics among organisms. So for example, if we're looking at this chart, we can see where the domain bacteria, the kingdom Eubacteria, the cell type is prokaryotic. The cell structure, they have a cell wall, and they also have peptoglycan in their to make up their cell wall. They have unicellular body type. They are autotrophic and heterotrophic, so they can go through both of those processes in order to gain nutrition. And then some examples all the way over to the right-hand side. If we move all the way down to eukarya, domain eukarya, and plants. Eukarya is the domain, plants is the kingdom. Their cell type is eukaryotic, meaning that they have membrane-bound organelles inside of their cells. They have a cell wall made up of cellulose. They are multicellular, meaning they have more than one cell that makes up their body. They are autotrophic. They make their own food from sunlight. Some examples are ferns and pine trees. The domain eukarya, the kingdom Animalia. Those organisms are eukaryotic, meaning that they have membrane-bound organelles in their cell wall or inside of their cells. They have no cell wall. All we have is a membrane around our cells. We are multicellular, heterotrophic, have to consume food from the environment. Some examples are humans, birds, earthworms, and a number of other examples as well. So the domain bacteria is equivalent to kingdom Eubacteria. Common name for the domain is bacteria. Bacteria are prokaryotes that have a strong exterior wall. They have a unique genetic system. However, bacteria have the same kind of cell membrane lipid as most eukaryotes do. So remember, it's very important for cell membranes to have lipids in them. The reason that lipids are important is that lipids, i.e. fats, repel water. If we did not have lipids inside of our cell membranes, our cells would dissolve in water. So all bacteria are similar in structure. They have no internal compartments. And traditionally, bacteria have been classified according to their shape, the nature of their cell wall, their type of metabolism, and the way in which they obtain nutrients. They are the most abundant organism on our planet. They are found in just about every single environment known on our planet. The domain Archaea is equivalent to the kingdom Archaeobacteria. The common name for members of the domain is Archaea. Archaea have a chemically unique cell wall and membrane and a unique genetic system. The genetic systems of Archaea they share some similarities with those of eukaryotes. And so they have some systems that are much more like eukaryotes than even prokaryotes. So Archaea are somewhere between prokaryotes and eukaryotes as far as their genetic systems. Archaea were found in extreme environments to begin with. Some examples of those extreme environments were salt lakes, the deep ocean, or hot springs that exceeded 100 degrees Celsius, 212 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you that prefer the American system. Those archaea are called extremophiles. Archaea called methanogens live in oxygen-free environments. And then some archaea live in the same environments as many bacteria do. The domain eukarya is made up of the kingdoms Protista, fungi, plant, and animal. Members of the domain are all eukaryotes, which are organisms composed of eukaryotic cells. And remember always that eukaryotic cells are cells that have membrane-bound organelles within them. The cell interior is very complex, and this complexity allowed for cells to be much larger than prokaryotic cells. So eukaryotic cells, outside of the fact that they have membrane-bound organelles and prokaryotic cells do not, they are also much larger. The complex interstructure also enabled the evolution of multicellular organisms. All eukaryotes have cells with a nucleus and other internal compartments, and true multicellularity and cellular reproduction only occur in eukaryotes. This is very important. Sexual reproduction in eukaryotes leads to genetic diversity. It allows organisms to not be exactly like their parents. You are genetically independent from your parents. Do you have many of the same similarities? Absolutely. Are you exactly the same as them? No. So true multicellularity means that activities of individual cells are coordinated and the cells themselves are in contact. Sexual reproduction allows for genetic material to be recombined when parents mate. And sexual reproduction is an important part of the life cycle of most eukaryotes. Prokaryotes went through this process where they either bud or they go through a process of fission where they just basically break apart. It's still the same genetic information. Whereas when genetic information from eukaryotes combines, there's a mixture of the genetic information of both parents. So the offspring ends up slightly different. The major groups of eukaryotes. They are defined by number of cells, body organization, and types of nutrition. The different kingdoms are Plantae, Animalia, Fungi, and Protista. The plants. Almost all plants are autotrophic, so they make their own food from energy from the sun. The process in which a plant makes its own food is called photosynthesis. And photosynthesis occurs in the organelles called chloroplasts inside of plants. The plant cell wall is made up of cellulose, which is very hard, it is very rigid. And there are more than 350,000 known species of plants. Animalia. Animals are multicellular heterotrophs, meaning that they have to consume their own food from the environment. Their bodies may be simple collections of cells or complex networks of cells. As you will notice when we get into our dissections, if we were to look at a sponge, they are very simple collections of cells, whereas once we get into those complex networks of organ systems inside of the frog, we'll see that there is a much greater deal of complexity in those organisms. Animal cells lack a rigid cell wall. They all have membranes, and it's important to remember those membranes have a lipid layer around the outside of them, keeping them from water damage. And there are more than 1 million known species of animals on our planet. There are more that are found every year. Fungi. Fungi are heterotrophs, meaning they have to consume food within the environment as well. Most of them go through a process of decomposition in order to obtain their food. They are also multicellular. They have a rigid cell wall that is made up of chitin. They are considered most closely related to animals versus any other kingdom. and there are more than 70,000 known species of fungi. Protista. The kingdom Protista is the leftover group. It's a very diverse group. Every single member within this group is slightly different from the others. Protists can be animal-like, they can be plant-like, they can be fungi-like. For a number of years, biologists recognized four major groups of protists: the flagellates, the amoebas, the algae, and the parasitic protists. And as you can imagine, the parasitic protists would be the ones that would be like parasites on other organisms. Algae were the ones that would go through photosynthesis. Flagellates had very long flagellated tails that allowed them to move through their environment. The amoebas were kind of oozing like protists that could ooze through their environment. More recently, biologists have proposed to replace Protista with several new kingdoms. These kingdoms would classify protists that seem to be unrelated to any other group. However, there are a number of protists that are able to be reclassified into existing kingdoms. So, for example, algae have chloroplasts. They could, in essence, be put into the kingdom of plants. Currently, though, I don't believe that change is actually being made. So, to summarize, biologists have added complexity and detail to the classification systems as they've learned more about organisms. Today, we tentatively recognize 3 domains and 6 kingdoms. The domain bacteria is equivalent to the kingdom Eubacteria. Domain archaea is equivalent to the kingdom Archaeobacteria. The domain Eukarya is made up of the kingdoms Protista, fungi, Plantae, and Animalia.